Well, welcome, everybody. We're still kind of assembling here.
Thanks for your welcome.
David, are you snowed in?
I wouldn't say snowed in. We've got a couple inches here.
We're snowed in
So,
in
yeah.
Salem.
Yeah. I saw that earlier. It was like, yeah, you had a lot more than we did.
Yeah.
Fun.
We just got cold weather in Iowa. It was -8 last night,
Oh my God.
and my kids are going there to Iowa for an event, and so I can turn up the heat remotely, but it took the whole day of it running to get it up to 67.
Yeah,
So
right. Yeah.
It's in
Well, I,
Santa Barbara. In Santa Barbara, it's raining and 56 degrees.
Oh.
well, here in Florida, we hit a record 89 today.
Oh,
Wow.
where are you in Florida?
I am in the Orlando area, Winter Park, and
Okay.
my daughter is up in Maine, and they haven't gone above freezing for 2 weeks now. And it's been 17, real heat wave up there. But here I am, and as I said, I think we hit a record today.
I would believe that. It's not that hot down here in Miami. It's about 80 degrees for a high today.
Hmm.
So,
Oh, the
but
ocean breezes always make things a little bit easier to deal with. I lived in Miami, but not since, oh my God, I hate to think how many years ago. I went to school in Miami in ninth grade. And let me tell you, that was many, many, many years ago.
okay. Well, we're looking for Cindy to join us, but I should probably just get on with introductions. I'm Terry Lohman, and I'm co-chair for UU's for Just Economic Community. Um, Tonight we have David Delk to talk about war and climate, and he has a long record of peace activism and climate activism, so he should be very knowledgeable about this.
Very good.
David,
I'm
are you ready?
Yeah, I guess I am as ready as I'm going to be.
Okay.
So you have to find the right. Here it is. Okay. All right. So we'll begin. Or I will begin. Um, The Reverend Martin Luther King Jr., in his April 1967 speech at the Riverside Church in New York City, titled Beyond Vietnam, A Time to Break Silence, said in part, true compassion is more than flinging a coin to a beggar. It comes to see that an edifice which produces beggars needs restructuring. And he further said, a nation that continues year after year to spend more money on military defense than on programs of social uplift is approaching spiritual death. America is in this spiral of spiritual death now. America's democracy is in a severe crisis, no matter what your political beliefs. I don't believe that there's any disagreement on this point. Today, I wanted to talk about three anti-democratic institutional aspects of our political system: the U.S. Supreme Court and its enhancement or its embrace of corporate personhood and the allowing of corporate interests to have free speech rights, especially during political campaigns. And two, the ever-growing gap between the very, very rich and the rest of us. And three, the military-industrial complex. But because talking about all three of those will take close to an hour just reading what I've written, I'm going to drop the first two and jump right into the military industrial complex. And if you decide you'd like me to come back sometime and talk about the rest of what I was going to talk about, I'd be happy to do that. So let's just get right into the interaction of democracy in the military industrial complex. What is democracy and militarism? Democracy, as you likely know because you live in the self-proclaimed greatest democracy in the world, is rule by the people. We know that democracy can be either real or just a facade over a system which is in fact less than democratic. Democracy in form, but not in reality. This is what we as Americans experience generally as we go to vote every 2 years, but with few meaningful choices and a real governing structure composed of multinational corporations, the super wealthy, the duopoly of Republican and Democratic parties, and the military. On the other hand, militarism is a system of governance which allows decision making either by or in the interest of the military, including those national and multinational corporations which are fed by our new $895 billion US war budget for fiscal year 2025. President Eisenhower warned Americans of the dangers which the military-industrial complex poses to democracy and to all of us. According to President Eisenhower, World War II had demonstrated the need to develop a strong armaments industry to defend the American people. In 1961, in President Eisenhower's farewell address to the nation, he warned, this conjunction of an immense military establishment and a large arms industry is new in the American experience, yet we must not fail to comprehend its grave complications. In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist. Well, it appears the American people heard those words, but did next to nothing to act against the grave implications. President Eisenhower spoke his words of warning on the dangers posed by the military-industrial complex at the end of his last term in office, when he was least able to do anything about the danger other than to issue a warning. The power of this complex to undermine democracy is seen with near unanimous congressional votes each year in favor of increasing the war budget. That ever-increasing budget represents about 50% of the nation's discretionary budget. It is larger than the combined budgets of the Departments of State, Agriculture, Labor, Health and Human Services, Transportation, Justice, Housing and Urban Development, EPA, Army Corps of Engineers, FEMA, legislative expenses, and more. In a 5-year period from 2017 to 2022, the annual defense budget increased from $648 to $875 billion annually. Even in 2000, just 25 years ago, the annual defense spending was only $320 billion. Yet, for fiscal year 2025, it will be at least $895 billion. That is almost more than 9/10 of a trillion dollars. That will be almost $9 trillion over the next decade if the budget each year was $895 billion. Almost $9 trillion at minimum over the next decade, all going to war and the military. But even this massive, nearly $1 trillion budget is just a baseline, with further emergency allocations for the war in Ukraine against Russia, for Israel's war throughout the Middle East, and for the militarization of the Pacific to be expected. And whatever new war the powers that be think up. Our current president has suggested a new military project. Move all the Palestinians in Gaza to Jordan and Egypt and redevelop Gaza as a tourist mecca. And President Trump is also threatening Mexico with sending American troops into Mexico to combat the drug cartels, which he is labeling as terrorists. But the threat to democracy is more than just the oversized spending budgets. The real danger is the amount of money the military-industrial complex spends for lobbying Congress and for funding political campaigns. the defense industry undermines American democracy by giving massive campaign contributions to members of Congress, especially to the members of the Appropriations Committees and the Senate and House Armed Services Committees. In figures released by Open Secrets, in 2022, 15 defense contractors contributed more than $2.3 billion to House Armed Service Committee members' campaigns. Among those corporations, General Dynamics, Lockheed Martin, Raytheon Technologies, BAE Systems, Northrop, Boeing, and more. It's not just members of the House Armed Services Committee that benefits from defense sector political contributions. Open Secrets also reports that during the 2022 election cycle, members of the Senate Armed Services Committee received $1.2 billion. And naturally, you didn't have to just be a member of those committees to receive political campaigns. In fact, major defense contractors still had lots of money to spread among the other members of both the House and the Senate, Democrats and Republicans. In addition to the political contributions, lobbying by defense sector companies amounted to more than $139 million in 2023. In that same year, there were 904 defense industry lobbyists. There were only 535 members of Congress. Defense industry lobbyists outnumbered members of Congress by almost 370. These figures again from Open Secrets. Yet another source of the military-industrial complex's power comes from the revolving door of government defense officials and retired military officials moving into the employ of major defense contractors. And the revolving door swings the other way as well, with former CEO and other high-ranking defense contractors taking positions in the Department of Defense and other defense agencies where they could watch over their special interests. And then they revolve back again. In either case, the appearance of conflicts of interest undermines any trust that citizens have that their government is working for them. President Trump, at the beginning of his first administration, issued an order forbidding the hiring of corporate executives. But then he violated his own rule over and over again, including for his Secretary of Defense, James Mattis, a former board member of General Dynamics. His deputy secretary came from Boeing, the Pentagon's second largest contractor. And then President Biden followed Trump by choosing Lloyd Austin as his Secretary of Defense, a former board member of Raytheon Technologies after having retired as a U.S. Army four-star general. The military-industrial complex influences, manipulates, and controls American politics at every level of the American government, resulting in an American war on the world. The only solution to end the military-industrial complex's domination is to cut the military budget. Proposals in Congress to do just this seem to be gaining in support both in and out of Congress. Call your U.S. representative and U.S. senators and tell them that you want the quote-unquote defense budget cut dramatically now, and that the money should instead be spent on activities that support the peaceful aspirations of the American people, like Medicare for all, universal child care, repair of our broken water systems, and moving to a green economy. The money could be used to fund our COP obligations to the less developed nations to help them deal with the consequences of global climate crisis. Stop the endless wars now. Move the money. We know that the power of American militarism comes from several measures. We know the power of American militarism from several measures, like its effect on the First Amendment, the right to free speech and a free press. I mentioned that the annual war budget is a bipartisan effort, not to discuss the issues, but to rush the process to get it approved with huge majorities, generally. First, in the approval process is to get both the House and the Senate Armed Services Committee each individually agree to a figure. Generally, that agreed on figure is larger than what the President and the Pentagon want and have requested. This is in part because Congress has required that each of the services submit their own list of priorities, which the President's budget does not cover. This is an opportunity for the major contractors to get the ears of members of these committees, advocating for gravy projects within their own districts. The members are all too happy to agree because they get to chirp to their constituents about all the jobs that are being created in their home districts. Never mind that funding jobs in the military-industrial complex has proven to be a much less effective way to create jobs than if the same amount of money was spent otherwise, for instance, to create green jobs to address the climate crisis. The war industry determines the government's pro-war narrative by funding think tanks and media. These think tanks create and amplify threats and justify a global military posture. Revolving door participants regularly pen opinion pieces in major publications without fully disclosing their personal war profiteering. American militarism comes at high cost to the lives of real human beings. Overinvestment in the military comes at the high cost of under-investigating in other needs, including addressing the climate crisis and the homeless crisis. American militarism has had damaging effects on America and the world. During the past 7 decades, America has been at war constantly, moving to the Vietnam War and continuing with the Gulf War, the Balkan War, the war on Iraq and Afghanistan, the war in Kuwait, and currently our war via our proxy Ukraine with Russia. And we're just itching to get started with China, using Taiwan as a proxy. The National Priorities Project looks at what all those military budget amounts could buy instead. Their website allows you to look at specific trade-offs. Just looking at Oregon taxpayers. Since 2001, Oregon taxpayers have paid more than $75 billion for the total cost of war. What might that money have bought instead? Well, just as an example, we could provide more than 32 million homes with wind power, scholarships for almost 317,000 university students for 4 years, hire more than 133,000 elementary school teachers, build almost 1.5 million public housing units, create more than 348,000 new jobs, paying $15 an hour with benefits. After paying for all that, we would still have almost $100,000 left over. And that is just based on the tax expenses paid for by Oregonians for war.
That's good.
A couple of years ago, I was on a national UU Zoom call, and one person said she needed to write a sermon on militarism and was concerned that she would not be nonpartisan. My response was that she need not be concerned because militarism is one of the most nonpartisan issues around. Because of the ever-developing military-industrial complex, each year the war budget, also known as the National Defense Authorization Act, or the NDAA, is enthusiastically
I
enacted
had
by
that someplace.
majorities of Democrats and Republicans in Congress in most cases. Very recently, the House voted approval for the 2025 NDAA amounting to $895 billion with a vote of 281 yes versus 140 no. And the Senate adopted the same bill by a vote of 85 yes to 14 no. The 2024 NDAA authorized spending $883.7 billion. For the 2025 annual budget, the NDAA increased that figure to $895 billion. That is an increase of more than $11 billion in just 1 year. Yes, that figure of $895 billion is almost $1 trillion, with expected additional special allocations during the coming year for wars in Ukraine, Russia, Israel, Gaza, maybe Taiwan and China, as well as the South Pacific, we will surely go over $1 trillion for the year. And we should note that most of these funds are added to the national debt. You will not be asked to pay for the wars you authorize by these increases in taxes. No, it is better to let our children pay for our wars later than paying for them now. To put these budgets in a little more perspective, 2020 world military expenditures totaled almost $2 trillion, worldwide $2 trillion. The U.S. portion of that is $778 billion, almost 40% of the whole world's expenditures. That $778 billion is greater than the military budgets of the 10 next largest nations. It is larger than the military budgets of China, Russia, India, Saudi Arabia, United Kingdom, Germany, Japan, Australia, and France combined. And now note that most of these other nations are friends of the U.S. And the U.S. spends more than the rest of the nations on the earth, $778 billion versus $448 billion for the other 144 nations of the world. The National Priorities Project tells us globally, 2023 proved to be a record-breaking year for military spending. In a report published by the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, global military spending reached a new peak of 2.4 trillion, an increase of nearly 7% over the 2022 level. So let's look at the environmental costs that are associated with militarism. Cindy Peiser, who I think is on this call, is a UU from California, and she has for the past 3 General Assemblies submitted a proposed action of immediate witness titled Code Red for Humanity, Protect the Livable Planet We Love, Addressing the Climate Impacts of Military Emissions. She notes that UUs need to respond to the global climate crisis with a right of conscience, our use of the democratic process in our congregations, and advocates within society to prioritize saving valuable and essential ecosystems and human communities with justice, equity, and compassion while there is still time. The point of all this is that global military greenhouse gas emissions, including war impacts, are estimated to be 6% of the total annual greenhouse gas emissions. The U.S. military is the largest producer of greenhouse gas emissions. The only way to shrink the American military's emissions, the military itself must shrink. The U.S. has over 750 military bases and is developing more all the time. Instead, the U.S. should be actively in the process of closing military bases. The National Priorities Project and the Institute for Policy Studies tells us that, quote, one of the military jets, the B-52 Stratofortress, consumes about as much fuel in an hour as the average car driver uses in 7 years. Obviously, calls for each of us to drive less are silly by comparison. Cindy also calls attention to the lack of reporting on U.S. military emissions, both here in the United States and in overseas locations in war zones and on military bases. The U.S. should report all greenhouse gas emissions, including all those from the military-industrial complex. At the COP 2015 meeting in Paris, the agreement included an annual report back requirement for national emissions, but the reporting of military emissions remained and continues to remain optional. Military emissions must be subject to mandatory reporting. Military emissions must be reported separately from civilian emissions so that the impact of those emissions can be clearly seen. Further, other tricks which seek to hide military emissions must be ended. These tricks include emissions from U.S. military bases must be included in greenhouse emissions totals for the U.S., not for the host nations. And all emissions from war activities must be reported, whether produced in the U.S. or in foreign nations. I know this is all there's a lot of numbers there. It's kind of overwhelming. It seems like there's little we can do to overcome this American militarism. But if we are to save our democracy or our environment or end the endless war, we have to try. First, I know that we can't do this individually. We have to gather in strength and work together. We need to gather in public places and tell the world that this is wrong, that it violates our moral values, that our very survival is at stake if we continue in the same manner into the future. In fact, we will have no future. How do we gather in public places? First, join a peace sign holding group. There's a lot of them in Portland. I will note that 2 such gatherings in Portland. Peace and Justice Works has one at the southwest corner of Pioneer Courthouse Square, starting on Friday evenings at 5 o'clock each week. This gathering has been taking place every Friday for over 20 years. And the second one happens almost every Saturday at the east end of the Burnside Bridge from 3 to 4:30. Easy to read signs are provided with a focus on the environmental and economic issues of war. I will add a link to the chat with that will direct you to see the signs as well as some other information. Unfortunately, this Saturday event has been canceled for the winter, but it will restart later this year when the weather gets better. In part, it was canceled this year because I was one Saturday when we were there, I got very sick and ended up in the hospital as a result of being in the cold weather. So we thought, well, maybe we better not do this right now because we do want to do it again later. Another idea is to go to public gatherings of candidates for federal office, U.S. representatives and U.S. senators. Ask all the candidates their position on the questions of war, the use of the military and the environment, how we should spend the federal discretionary funds, more than 50% on the military or 100% on real human needs. This is really important. We think incorrectly that Republicans support war and Democrats support peace. Yet recently, with the congressional approval of the fiscal year 2024 war budget, all Oregon Democrats voted no, except for Andrea Salinas. She voted with Oregon Republicans in favor of the NDAA Act. We should have been asking her questions about this before she was elected. This year, we should have done the same with all of the candidates, Democrats and Republicans, running for U.S. Congress. Regarding Representative Salinas, she did join the other Oregon Democrats in voting no on the fiscal year 2025 military budget this year. So very glad to see that change. We're a peace button all the time. Declare your beliefs on your coat and collars all the time. Now let's look at the sheet of paper titled "Take These Actions: Cut Military Spending and Move Funds to Domestic Needs." This a link to this particular sheet of paper will be included in the chat shortly. There are 4 bills listed there, which, if enacted, will sap energy from the military-industrial complex. Note that the bill numbers are from the last session of Congress, so will change in the new Congress as bills are introduced. But most likely, bill names will remain the same. Call your U.S. representatives and U.S. senators to co-sponsor these bills now. The people over the Pentagon Act will reduce the Department of Defense approximately by $100 billion and move that money to fund programs for real human needs. The second bill will create a Department of Peace. The third bill is the Religious Freedom Peace Tax Fund Act, which will affirm that taxpayers who are conscientiously opposed to war and preparation for war You can check on their federal tax returns that their money will not be used for anything other than non-military purposes, non-war purposes. The fourth bill would restrict the first use of nuclear weapons. This proposes that it should be the policy of the United States not to be the first to use nuclear weapons again. When the U.S. passes the bill, the U.S. will join China and India with no first use policies. Additionally, but printed on the reverse side of the sheet are two more bills introduced into Congress last session. H.R. 7264, the Stop Politicians Profiting from War Act of 2024, would prohibit defense industry stock trading and ownership by members of Congress and others. This would stop conflicts of interest when members of Congress vote on military matters. Write letters to the editor and other publications. Demand that the corporate media cover issues of militarism and war. Ask them to question elected federal officials and candidates for federal office on the issues we have covered today. Demand that they do their jobs. When elected federal officials vote on the war budget or other federal appropriations for war or other military actions, tell them that you want them to explain why they vote the way they do, whether yes or no, especially the annual defense budget, since this covers the expenditures of about half of the federal discretionary budget. We have a right to be informed by both the media and by our elected officials. Informing citizens on such matters is exactly the purpose of having a free press. Much of the corporate press seems to believe that a free press means the freedom to make excessive profits. In fact, the purpose of a free press is to inform the people. Can there be anything more important than how we as a nation and a people spend, or how much money we spend on war, even if we do generally refer to it as defense? On the aforementioned bills, call your representatives and your two senators on each bill. That's a total of just 3 calls. Each call does not need to be lengthy, just a few minutes. Say that you want them to sign as a co-sponsor of the piece of legislation, or if they have already signed on, thank them for doing so. Thanking them is really important. On that same sheet with the 6 bills, there is information on how to look up your representative and senators and find their contact information. And I will put that information in the chat as well. So let's start doing this today. It can make a difference if our federal representatives and U.S. senators know that we care about war and peace issues, and that you want them to promote peace, and that you expect them to do as well. Stop the war, start the negotiations. This suggests call on just one of these bills on each of the next 6 weeks to make it less time consuming. In summary, I've identified, but not elaborated on, 3 major threats to democracy: the ever-increasing income and wealth gaps, the ever-growing defense budget, and the U.S. Supreme Court, and made suggestions how we might address the concerns about the military-industrial complex. Now, let's get busy. We have got work to do. And so, Terry, are you going to take over now?
Well, that was great, David. Just wonderful, fabulous. You covered so much material so adroitly and in such depth. Thank you so much.
Very good. Good. Thank you. I'm really glad to have been invited. You probably notice a lot of references to Oregon and/or to Portland. This address was originally written for a presentation to a democracy fair that we had at the First Unitarian Church in Portland, and then I have given it to a number of other UU congregations through the state of Oregon as well as some non-UU organizations as well.
Okay, I've posted the resources that David sent out a few days ago. One of them is the different legislations and things that you can sign up for. The other is protest signs. And he's got 20 protest signs that are um, downloadable and printable. Um, do we have any questions? I'd like to just start with one thing, though. We're putting all this money into the military, and at what point do Americans go, I really don't care about my country? Why are we spending the money? You know, half the people are working in major deficits, and it's going to get worse because they're going to reduce health care and maybe Social Security and who knows what else. They say they won't, but then they turn around and do. The other piece of news that just came out, Dean Wander, board member for UUJC, just sent out a notice that Trump has um, Trump said he's going to cut the defense budget in half. Of course, I'll believe that one. Yeah, that's laughable. It isn't going to happen because he uh, he doesn't have the total control over the budget. So
Well, not only that, Terry, he doesn't have support for that among the Republicans.
no.
I was reading an article yesterday that that uh, excuse me, the budget bills for the next year are being written by Republicans in the House and the Senate, and that the House bill, or at least at this point, is saying that they want to increase the defense budget by $100 billion, and the Senate bill wants to increase it by $150 billion. So there's definitely a disconnect between what the legislative branch is thinking about and what the president says he's thinking about. But we have no reason to think that the president actually intends to do that, because we know, just on the basis of what he said, which that doesn't speak with much reliability, but he has said that he thinks that the United States should invade Mexico to attack these drug cartels, and then of course he's made his hopefully ridiculous proposal to move Palestinians out of the Gaza Strip into Jordan and Egypt, um, and then we would own it and rebuild it to create this Mecca in the Middle East. He has no intentions of actually cutting the military budget. So we'll see. There might be some little things that he will do, or he might think about reducing the pay that soldiers get, for instance, or how much housing they get, things like that. Um,
Yeah,
so-
David, there's only one area I see where Trump has actually talked about possibly reducing the military budget, and that seems to be getting serious on ending the Ukraine war, which that could make a difference. But I suspect they'll still find ways to spend all kinds of money, like
Yes.
they're going to have to rebuild Ukraine somehow.
Oh,
To
yeah,
have
yes.
stability
Yeah,
there. And who's going to pay for a lot of that, you see?
yeah. Well, hopefully, since we destroyed it all, we should step
Yeah.
up and pay for it.
And if we solve the situation in Israel, well, who's going to pay for rebuilding Gaza? You see,
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
that again, we spent huge amounts of destruction, and we'll probably be on the hook to rebuild it, or they won't get rebuilt. A lot
Or
of
it
this
won't get
probably
rebuilt.
a lot of
Right.
stuff probably will only get partially rebuilt, and
Mhm.
a lot of areas will end up much poorer.
Oh, yeah.
But
Yeah.
I think about Congress and the numbers you just gave. We should just say this is corruption. it's a legal form of corruption. That's what's going on right here. And the Congress, they all get richer by this, and they get longevity in their districts because they provide all these things, and it's a form of corruption. We don't, and then the worst forms of corruptions are the ones that are just embedded in the system and have been legalized or accepted. But you can tell they're corruption when they lead to gross misallocations of resources like we're having right now.
If
Well,
you,
I'd like to interject, for all of us on this call who are UUs, I would think that this wonderful talk that David just gave us, if we were able to have these kind of conversations within our own churches, that would go a long ways with UUs towards waking us up about these connections, because as David mentioned, we've been doing AIWs on relating the military expenses to climate and the costs climate-wise and the costs economically, but they have never gotten sufficient support from the GA delegates and the churches and the congregations. And I'm really hoping that all of you that are here, if you resonate with what David has said, that you'll consider discussing this in your churches if it's not already being discussed. Thank you.
Over time, George Kennan, U.S. ambassador to Russia in the 40s, said that Russia's wanted to weaken the United States. They've been doing that for years, and through social media, they're doing it. I'm beginning to think that the next battle will be for the hearts and minds of people, not necessarily militarily. Look at the amount of disinformation from Russia, China, and other countries that's in social media in America. Trump basically disbanded any agencies that would counteract disinformation on social media. And I find that very disturbing. And that, to me, okay, there's a book called Mindfuck. I don't have it close hand. Oh, well, I'll see if I can put it on the chat. But it talked about how they developed micro-targeting, on how Cambridge Analytica and others use that micro-targeting to sway this election of the American president in 2016 and the Brexit election, or Brexit referendum in the United Kingdom. So it isn't necessarily, the next war won't necessarily be fought by weapons. It'll be fought by social media and others to capture minds and hearts of Americans. And we should be able to counteract that. And it's going to be difficult to do, but that's something I'm aware of.
So I will just I will just interject. I think one of the important things that we can do is this talking with the media and letting them know that we are actually interested in this topic, and so that there becomes more of a discussion, that people hear that this is an issue, that we don't all support spending this kind of money, that there is a lot of other things that we could do with the money if we stopped spending it on the military. And then we also need to really keep talking to our elected U.S. representatives and senators, that when they vote, that we really want to hear from them as to why they really don't want to have this discussion. I know that. And the media doesn't want to have the discussion. So we need to pressure as much as possible elected officials to inform us about what they're doing and why they're doing it, and particularly about the military budgets and the National Defense Authorization Act every year, because they vote on this every year.
And I was thinking we don't have to worry so much about social media, maybe for some of the younger people, but you look at our mainstream media, and it's all into whatever the U.S. government puts out there in terms of war propaganda. These days, it's Ukraine and Israel and whatnot. Most of our mainstream media just reflects that right back to the public. And it's not just the war; you have the whole foreign policy. If they don't like a country like Cuba or Venezuela, you get all this uh, propaganda that's not really war propaganda, but it's the peace equivalent of it. It's geopolitical warfare. And so all our media, all our mainstream media reflects this kind of war or geopolitical warfare propaganda. And the social media stuff is just sort of extending that into a new realm where there are even fewer ways to counteract it unless you jump into the social media yourself. How are you going to make any difference? And then you become a victim of it, probably. See?
Yeah. So when I usually talk and think about media, I'm usually thinking about traditional media. But I do have a presence on Facebook, and so um, I became friends with Representative Salinas here in Oregon, and she quite frequently would post things about that she had gotten such and such amount of money for such and such a purpose for certain place here in Oregon, which was all really good. But I would post in response something along the lines of, think of how much more money you could have gotten them if you had not voted for the annual war budget. That was, that's $800 billion that could be available potentially for other purposes like these that you're claiming credit for. Thank you very much for doing this. But there is actually a lot more money that's available. Vote no on the NDAA in the next year. Well, I don't know that this made a difference, but in the next year, she did in fact vote no. So maybe she heard my message. So I guess the message is that we need to use all the medias that we can, social media or traditional media, and making the phone calls that as much as we can. Or in the picture behind me is where here in Portland, let's see, that's me in the orange shirt, and those are some of my signs that I made. And we do that every well, this is at the east end of the Burnside Bridge, so this is a once a week thing that we do when the weather's good, because like I said, I got very, very sick and ended up in the hospital for having done this once. So I don't want to do that again. So we'll wait until the weather gets a little bit warmer, and the wind doesn't blow quite so strongly, and so I really encourage you to look at those posters, and I'm not entirely sure that you can make copies of them and print them. Hopefully you can, but I will put my email address in the chat also, so that if anybody wants to have these sent to them, I can send them to you.
Hey, David, I think what John was talking about earlier, John, you were talking about the role of how the military decisions would be made by social media. So do you have any response to what David's saying in terms of us trying to be the media ourselves?
I really don't. this group has limited following. If we're effective, we'll have hundreds, if not thousands, of people tuning into this. But to me, it seems like we're the choir preaching to the choir. Now, I've heard it sounds like your typical liberal angst, your typical liberal stuff.
You know,
And
I'm not.
intellectually, it makes sense, but emotionally, it just doesn't connect with people.
I think it doesn't connect with people because people don't hear it in the first place.
They hear the war propaganda,
Yeah.
and it's just we're immersed in it and don't even realize it. You see, and it's because they have a huge budget for war propaganda. They don't call it that, but
Yeah.
they make sure that their message gets out, and ours is there, but it's minuscule in comparison. But it comes out when you have real wars. But then they, instead of solving the real wars, they just up the war propaganda. That's the sorry thing.
You know, I've seen new faces here that I haven't seen before. I wonder how you would all feel. Does anybody want to say where they're from or what church they go to, or just for us all to connect a little more fully?
Yeah, I'm in
Let
Oregon.
me point out that the person just speaking was Cindy Peister, not David Delk. So
Yeah, sorry guys, I'm misrepresenting myself.
Yeah, I'm in Oregon, and I just joined the board of Oregon Unitarian Universalists for Justice. And David sent out an email with a link to this thing. And I said, why not join and see what I can learn?
Very,
Well, it's great you joined us. Gary?
Yeah, hi, I'm Gary Butterfield, and I belong to the First UU Church in San Diego, and I'm also a member of Veterans for Peace and San Diego 350.org. And I actually work with Cindy on the Climate Crisis and Militarism project of Veterans for Peace. And I'm honored to be able to address this group next month on March 13th. And David, I thank you a lot. A lot of what I put in our presentation duplicates exactly what you said. In fact, I use a quote from Dwight Eisenhower. I use the MLK quote, etc. But we've taken a little bit of a different approach in that in San Diego, we used to protest the Miramar Air Show purely on the basis of it being pro-war, pro-violence, recruiting kids as young as 8 years old, etc. And our voices, we felt pretty good about what we said, but our local community really couldn't give a hoot about it. But about 4 years ago, we focused on the pollution aspect of the Blue Angels. And now I'm pleased to say that we have about 26 local climate, religious, social justice, community organizations now supporting our position to shut down military air shows. And it's an entry level to get climate people aware of what the military is doing and to get peace people aware of how bad the military's influence is on the climate. So I'm inviting you, tune in next month for more in depth, and we'll also have a couple things that we would ask you guys to do. But David, thank you. I really learned some things from your presentation, and I support you 100%.
Thank you.
Yes, I just wanted to say that I don't know where we would get anywhere in Florida because you guys maybe are just beginning to live with 2025. We've been living with it for a couple of years already. And we've got such a state of depression here and stress and trying to get anything taken care of here that it's just almost impossible to bring in a topic that might not be at the top of the list. Let's put it that way at this time.
Where are you, Evelyn?
I'm in the Orlando area in Florida. And currently our legislature is 3/4 Republican, 1/4 Democrat, and we have a dictatorial governor, and he has just implemented everything. Even in the legislature has complained, he has basically forced them back into 2 special meetings where they were not in session this past month, just to force things on immigration, for an example. We have really been, if you haven't been paying attention to Florida, it has been incredible. We've certainly lived with what was now, as I said, just coming into the rest of the country.
Evelyn, it's so wonderful to have you here speaking with us in terms of what your perspective is. It would be really lovely if you could join us as a regular thing, because I think we need to understand, all of us, just how bad it is in Florida and how that may impact us, and then help us find a way through this, because we're not ready to give up on it. And it's so lovely, Gary, that you showed up. And you guys, I tried to draft Gary to join our UUJEC board, but he's awfully busy. Anyway, it's just really good to have different voices from around the country here to express what all of your perspectives are. I'm wondering, is it Badger? I see someone's name there that I'm not familiar with. I don't know if I'm saying it right. And then also Dawn. It'd be lovely to hear from you, and maybe Hal, if you want to jump in and say anything, it would really be great.
I'll be glad to do that. Lucy, are you finished? I see your hand is still up.
I'm
It's
sorry.
Go ahead, Hal. Go ahead. Go ahead. I'll come later.
I'm here in Santa Barbara, California, and we just put together a town hall meeting with the help of Indivisible and Fearless Grandmothers and about 3 other groups. We attracted our Congressman, Salud Carbajal, and 4 other representatives at that town hall, and we attracted 1,500 people to let them know what we are concerned about. Most of it was about what's going on with Trump and what he's trying to do with our government. But we touched on military spending, and I've been sending emails to Representative Carbajal routinely. And as a result of this meeting, I'm going to be sending him more on military spending. I just actually sent one while I was listening here to ask him to stop voting for the military budget, which he has done habitually. And that's the one thing that he has been doing that's contrary to what most of his supporters really want. The other things he's doing with the environment and all the other subjects are fine. But he is an ex-Marine, and he has been supporting military spending for some time. And I'm going to keep after him until he stops voting yes until the budget is reduced. So we here are very much in support of what you're doing. I really appreciate, David, what you had to say. And we will also be doing what's necessary here in Santa Barbara to get the word out about military spending and something that can be done about it. Thank you for the opportunity.
I have to say goodnight because I have another call coming in. Thank you. And I did sign up for our next session. So thank you all.
Thank you.
Will bless us all.
Thanks, Evelyn.
Bye.
The Unitarian Unitarians are known for social justice activities, and how it impacts individuals. And how can we translate this into the concrete impact on people? You know, if you talk about you can talk about these things in an abstract manner, which, yeah, if you're an intellectual, you can relate to, but most people can't do that. It has to impact them in their daily life, their pocketbooks, or emotionally. So how can we reframe our message in a way that says that money spent on the military takes away from things that benefit you? When people, for instance, I like Robert Reich. I read his newsletter on a regular basis. He makes the point that when you talk about regulations, you're really talking about protections for people. So how can we use messaging and language to communicate that, yes, they're stealing, the military budget steals from the American public, American people?
Ruth?
Yes, it seems to me, I'm in Bowling Green, Ohio now. I moved here from Iowa a year ago, October, and I was in Iowa. I grew up in Iowa, but I lived again in Iowa for over 30 years before I moved here. And of course, Iowa was the first in the nation. And after my mom died and I retired, I was active in Democratic government politics in Iowa and the platform and all that. And I just got really disgusted with it because they think that it's like the polls have shown that the people want universal health care, and the economic analyses have shown that it would save money with a single payer. It would save a lot of money, and it would save everybody time, and people would be well. But people want it. But see, the major parties, neither one of them will put that through because of the campaign funding. And it's the same way with the military. As long as the military people are paying money for the campaigns, they just assume that people will vote for them no matter what. And I couldn't understand. I supposed, well, because, it seemed to me watching, I was in Iowa the last 3 times, not this time when they didn't even have a primary, but I paid attention, and they didn't care whether they did what the people wanted or not, because they just thought, well, all they have to do is say the other guys are worse. And of course, the other guys are saying that the other guys are worse. It's terrible. So I think that, well, that I've just given up. I joined the Green Party when I moved to Ohio because I was disgusted with it. And then with the genocide and war crimes, and it's illegal for the United States law and international law to fund it. And I hear a lot more backlash from liberals now that Trump's in, but it's like he didn't start those wars. And then yes, Biden joined the Paris Agreement for climate, but somebody said, I haven't checked the accuracy of it, does anybody know that I was told that war is exempt from the climate stuff.
Well,
so
yeah, David
we
was
can go
talking about that.
backwards, right?
David.
No, but see, I think it's like I think that if we could get like a real success on a third party, and uniformly on that we could break the duopoly, and so they would start paying attention to the people again. And I've heard Butch Ware he's running for governor of California. California, what he said was that California voted for universal health care in California, knowing that Schwarzenegger would veto it. And then after they didn't have a governor who would veto it anymore, then they didn't pass it. I see they aren't going to let it happen. And they talk good most of the time, some of the time, but what they're doing is horrible.
Yeah,
Ruth, what part of Iowa?
Oh, I grew up on a farm in Northeast Iowa. Graduated from Iowa State Teachers College in 1961 with a major in math and a minor in physics. Had met the man I married in calculus and chemistry class. He knew he wanted to be an astronomer from the time he was 11 years old from reading mythology. I always say, don't let teachers tell you what makes scientists. And I taught a year till he was finished in Iowa City. And then we were 4 years in Washington, D.C., got on at the Naval Observatory pretty soon. And then he transferred to the big telescopes in Flagstaff, Arizona. And I had a chance to move with the job in 1990 back to Iowa, like 60 miles from my folks, and they weren't very well. It is really hard to try to take care of elderly parents or see them from a distance. And then I'm in Ohio because my second daughter's been in the Toledo area for over 30 years. And I was 83. I thought, I'm sell my house, move to an efficiency apartment, see how much room I need. And then when I told her I was thinking of moving to Ohio, she was really glad. I just can move into, I can stay independent longer. And
Great.
yeah, it's a good thing. I mean, people are. I learned really young that people are people everywhere, and the Republicans are people too. And I try to communicate, like, because I'm 84, and hang out at the senior center because there's people who disagree politically, but people want the same thing. And
Yep.
you have to get rapport with them in order to make any difference.
Well, glad to know
Well,
more
don't
about
give
you.
up, Ruth. Come back, and you won't be so
Well,
alone.
I will try to remember whatever. I knew I was working for the phone company after I was divorced in 1977. Dick was bipolar and off his medicine. I had 3 minor children, so I worked for the phone company. But I talked to a lot of retired people working for the phone company in Arizona. We talked to the winter visitors, spring and fall, and I knew that retired people are busier than working people. When you're working, you don't even think about going to things you can't. Then once you retire, you think you can do everything and you can't.
Well, thank you, Ruth. I think Hal's had his hand up for a while. So, Hal, did you want to say something or us?
Yeah.
Well, yes, I just wanted to call attention to the fact that one way to, get word out to millions of people is what we did for our town hall this last Saturday. Uh, People from the Indivisible contacted KSBY, the television station for the Central Coast of California, and they covered it with a camera. We had 1,500 people there. And then they passed that on to MSNBC, and Rachel Maddow had us on national television, with what we were demonstrating for, and it got a lot of attention nationally.
Good call.
Yeah, good job. I wanted to respond a little bit to what Ruth said. If you don't like how politicians supposedly represent you, one of the ways that you can bring that to the attention of other people, is by running against them. And 2 times here in Portland, I ran against Representative Earl Blumenauer, who was a really good guy. He was really pissed at me because in an interview we both did, I kept telling him what a great guy he was. And he didn't like the fact that I was running against him anyway. But my but by being able to run against him, I did not run against him as a Democrat. I ran against him as a Progressive Party member in Portland. And so in Oregon, if you get the nomination from a minor party, you automatically get onto the ballot. And I don't know, laws everywhere if that's the case or not. But so I was able to get on the ballot 2 times against him, and I in one race where he normally would get like 98% of the vote because he was very popular. He I got 7% of the vote. And so my message that was primarily consisted of a voter's pamphlet statement that outlined my objections to him with regard to the war, and he always voted against funding the war budget. So I didn't have any disagreement with him on that. But I kept asking, why don't you ever talk about it? You have a moral obligation to bring this up as a subject of debate. And on that basis, and the basis of the rest of and then I outlined a progressive platform of actions that I supported for Congress to take. On the basis of that, I got 7% of the vote, and people did talk about it. So I really recommend that if you have an relatively easy way to get on the ballot and to challenge some of these people, do it. That's how we get the message out. That's it. Thank you, Ruth.
Don, do you want to say anything at all? You've been so quiet.
Thank you. Have been following David Delk around since I first met him in 2012 at a Oregon Progressive Party meeting. I follow him wherever he goes because he does so many good things. And I've learned so much from him, and it's helping the world.
So thank you, Dawn. I appreciate that. I want to point out that over this shoulder, left shoulder, is Dawn in the picture in our little gathering at the east end of the Burnside Bridge. So thank you, Dawn. We'll start doing that again.
I am so excited to do that again with you,
Right.
and I look forward to working with you in the future, David.
Yeah, good. Thank you. So obviously Dawn is from Portland, Oregon.
I'm reading Noam Chomsky, and it is the most revealing information in the world on the military and how propaganda works. So it should be required reading for everybody.
What book are you particularly reading?
I just read Towards a New Cold War that came out in 1972, but I think it's the most pertinent knowledge to be reading right now because there's so much information about that could have prevented all the wars that we're in now, including Palestine and Israel. And I'm also reading the Indispensable Chomsky, and he has several talks that David Barsamian has interviewed him with. So I've got a lot on my plate, but it is good work.
Good. Thank you, Dawn.
It's really lovely to have you. It really is very lovely. I'm so glad you came.
Lucy, you've been so patient.
Fine. David, I'm very interested in what you're saying, said earlier about the small groups, and I think Dawn is part of that too. My experience, I'm old, in the 1980s in Berkeley, uh, was that we were trying to keep nuclear weapons out of Europe. And there were affinity groups all over the Bay Area that got together and made banners and talked about the issues, protested at Livermore Labs, went to jail, et cetera, et cetera. And so there's power in small groups. And I'm just wondering how you've organized the ones that came to be in Portland and perhaps have suggestions for other people to do that. It was a way for getting younger people involved too. They really were part of it then.
Yeah, so we formed I'm the local chair of the Alliance for Democracy, and so we sent a message. I sent a message out to primarily the core group, which is a small group itself, about this. And I also am a member of the Peace Action Group at the First Unitarian Church. So I sent a message to them also saying that we do this. I sent the message to the Oregon Progressive Party, of which I also happen to be the chair for the Oregon Progressive Party. And so I sent these messages out and just said, this is what we would like to do. This is when we would like to do it. Can you come? And so we got some people to say yes, they would come. I made the signs. Office Depot was very helpful, and then we just decided on the day to start, and we started doing it. And so when we get started again, I'll send the messages out again, and we'll see who comes. Some people came almost all the time. Other people came some of the times, and that was fine, depending on what their schedule was. But we had a definite time when we're going to be there, and for how much time, and we had the signs. And I really did discourage people from bringing their own signs. The reason being is that homemade signs generally can't be read very well, particularly when people are waving them around too. And so I really encourage people who join us to hold the sign steady, not to wave it around. Dawn quite frequently brings a flag which waves in the wind, so that gets us a little attention. But the signs are clear enough that they can be read by people as they drive by. And we get just a tremendous number of people who honk with approval, thumbs up, all that stuff. I know that all of those people that are responding to us are not liberals. They're not necessarily liberals, but they do respond to the message. And the other thing that I have asked people not to do is bring signs that are specific to particular wars. We are opposed to war in general, wherever they are, and we are opposed to funding war preparations wherever those preparations might take us. And so our signs are either, I'm trying to see, that sign there over my other shoulder says, U.S. military is the world's #1 polluter. And I had signs about student debt and housing, things like that. Well, you can look at the signs and see what the signs say, but none of them address any specific war.
Interesting.
Yeah, and we got criticized. There was a group of ceasefire people, a large group that had been meeting up at one of the senator's offices close by, and all those people came down and paraded across on the street in front of us, and quite a few of them came up and said, "Why aren't you talking about Gaza?" And my response was, because we have a larger problem. I mean, it's hard hard to believe that we could have a larger problem than Gaza, but we do have a larger problem than Gaza, and it's the whole military-industrial complex. So these signs address that problem in much more general, but at the same time in a much more specific way with the particular signs.
Interesting. Yeah. Thank you.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Do we have any more questions? Well, it is getting close to my bedtime. I'm Eastern. Okay, I guess I'll end it if we've got all that. Thank you, David. This was most informative.
Yeah, great, good. Thank you. Thank you all for listening. And I really had a much longer presentation if I had included the other two topics. So I'd be happy to come back sometime and talk about either one or both of them.
Sure.
Good.
Okay. Good night.
Great. Good. Good night.
Right.